Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Adamullah ajurakum. Today, I'm here to ask one simple question. Why are we here commemorating the Shahada, the martyrdom of Imam Hussein? What's the point of us standing in this cold, in this rain, in this freezing rain, and in this snow, 1400 years after his passing? What's the reason behind this? And what has brought us out here today? And I begin by challenging every public official and every person in office in looking into the history of who Hussein is. I'm not asking them to look at him as the theologian, nor am I asking them to look at him as the Muslim. I am asking them to look at him through historic lenses of who he was as a person. Whether God exists or not, there was Jesus of Nazareth as a person of history. Whether God exists or not, there was Moses. Whether God exists or not, there was a man named Muhammad, son of Abdullah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Whether God exists or not, there was a man named Hussein, son of Ali. And I want every single official and person inside and outside of the government, every human, to just look at this person as to who he was as a human. Look at him as a statesman. Look at him as a leader. Study him as a revolutionary, as a defender of rights. Sallallahu Muhammad wa Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So I want everyone to just look at him. Who he was as a statesman, as a politician, as a leader, as a revolutionary, as a defender of rights and freedoms, as a philosopher, and like that chant recited earlier, as a teacher. Everyone should look at him as to who he was as a person indifferent of his religion. And I began this lecture, inviting everyone to look at him. Why? Because he embodied the views and beliefs as we as Canadians admire and defend. He embodied these views and represented these same views. For example, something as simple as animal rights. Imam Hussein in Karbala represented animal rights. When he goes and gives water to the horses of Yazid's army, that's a form of representing animal rights, because he could not bear looking at the suffering of another creature. Rights of equality and multiculturalism. Is that not preached here? Who practiced multiculturalism better than Abu Abdullah, Imam al-Hussein? In his camp was the elderly of Habib al-Mudahir. In his camp was the small of Ali al-Asghar. In his camp was John, the black Abyssinian. In his camp was Wahab, the Christian. In his camp was made up of all cultures and all backgrounds. His wife herself was a Persian princess, Jahir Banu. If you want to look, even his father comes and beautifully says what on this note of multiculturalism? The betterment of men. I want everyone to pay attention to this. Imam Ali comes and says, the betterment of men lies in their being different from one another, for they will perish if they are all equal. Here the Imam is emphasizing and praising the differences that we share as humans. Women's rights. Who represented women's rights better than Imam Hussein in Karbala? When he made Sayyida Zainab his ambassador of his story throughout the ages. The defender of speech, the defender of freedom, the one who represented the freedom of assembly, again was Hussein in Karbala. He took a stand and sacrificed his life and that of his family and friends to fight oppression and injustice. He defended basic human rights, the rights of liberty, of freedom of thought and expression. He was a brave warrior and yet loving and compassionate. He went through the enemy lines with ease, yet at the same time he cried for his enemies out of love. A person who carries these two traits at the same time. He's a warrior in the battlefield, but at the same time, when his killer sat on his chest, he began to cry for him, saying, the reason you'll go to hell is because of me killing you. This was Imam al-Hussein. And these were the attributes he represented. Hussein was the one who was generous with the poor and supporter of the impoverished. I want to narrate one quick story to display his generosity, because here we're answering who was Hussein. A man comes and he has a debt to pay. He said, go to this house in Medina. He goes to the door of Abu Abdullah, and here he says, I have a debt. The Imam just slightly opens the door without looking into the face and gives him 4,000 dinars. At this point, the man asked him, why are you not opening the door fully? The Imam replies, because I don't want you to feel ashamed by looking at me. Look at the way in which he gives. Here the man, seeing this form of generosity, this form of selflessness, begins to cry. The Imam says, why are you crying? Did I not give you enough? He says, no, I'm weeping because of the thought of a hand as generous as yours will one day lay under the dust. He's crying at the mere idea of a hand as generous as Hussein's will one day lie under the dust. And because of that, there's a couplet that's enshrined over the Dari of Imam Hussein by this man, which reads, "O dear Hussein, one who comes to you is never disappointed. Your door is always open for anyone who approaches your house." Sallu ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
The Imam had this love for generosity and justice because he was raised in the house of generosity and justice. He was raised in this house. When his father comes and says, and if this one tradition from Amir al-Mu'mineen, this one tradition is practiced throughout the world, would there be any peace? Would there be any war? Would there be any strife? This tradition, what does it read? If he is not your brother in faith, then know he is your equal in humanity. If this one tradition was practiced throughout the world, would there be any war? Would there be any bloodshed? If he is not your brother in faith, know he is equal in humanity. And that's when he comes and he says, as the governor, I would not blame a Muslim man. I would not blame a Muslim if he died at hearing that a woman was attacked and her property was stolen, even if that property was given back to her. I would not blame a man dying out of grief just for hearing this injustice was committed. This is to which extent he showed compassion, to which extent they hated oppression. And the Imam, to further this point, he would come and cry at this when hearing the oppressed. And during the time of Muawiyah, just want to go by this quick story. There's a woman by the name of Sauda. She was a lover of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And when she went to Muawiyah to complain about a governor she had put in power because he was oppressing the people of her town, she goes to him complaining, "Oh Muawiyah, this person is taking advantage of, he's killing our men and he's stealing our land." Muawiyah is sitting at Sauda, he looks at her and he starts taunting her. He starts mocking her. Because she used to support Imam Ali back in the battles. He says, remember those days where you used to recite heroic poetry for your leader Amir al-Mu'mineen, and now you come to me? She's like, your oppression has made me forgot. But she's like, I've come here complaining about your governor. At this point he comes and says what? He says, now that you've come to me with this, I will tell him, I will send him so he may treat you as he pleases. Here Sauda simply looks at him and says what? May Allah bless that pure body that is buried, with whom justice was buried with. May Allah bless that body which justice was buried with. She's talking about Amir al-Mu'mineen Najaf. With his passing and his death, justice was buried on this day. Justice was buried. Until today, there's no justice. Whether here or there or any part of the world, this same exists. And when I come, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
And she continued telling Muawiyah, when I came to Amir al-Mu'mineen with this complaint of a governor that he had instilled, he began to cry and he grabbed his beard and he looked into the skies and he says, oh Allah, I did not put these governors to take advantage of the people. This was his reaction, and then he later fired this man. And Imam al-Hussein was raised in this house of justice and compassion. And that's why when he comes and fight, what does he do? He fought falsehood with truth, not more falsehood, which was the reality of what's going on today. He fought hypocrisy with sincerity, not more hypocrisy. He fought hate with love, not more hate. He fought injustice with justice, not more injustice with what's going on. We want to go liberate somewhere? We want to go fight the injustice somewhere else? What's to happen? We do more injustice. We do more hypocrisy. We bring about more lies. And I start off by asking, why are we here 1400 years later? Why are we here? The reason is that stand he took against oppression resonates throughout the ages. He is a man who's timeless and universal. He is a man who's timeless and universal. He sacrificed his family and his friends in defense of honor, dignity, and justice. And he sacrificed his heart to God. He sacrificed his heart to Allah. And for that, Allah gave him the hearts of the millions. And here's a part of those millions. And for that, Allah gave him the hearts of millions. And the Prophet comes and says, and answering the question as to why we're here, the Prophet comes and reads, surely there exists in the hearts of the believer, with respect to the martyrdom of Hussein, a flame that sits in his heart that will never subside. And that's what brings us out in this cold. And that's why we're here, because the promise made by the grandfather of Imam Hussein, that the believers will come and they'll have this flame in their heart that will not subside because of the struggle and the pain that he went through. On that note, I want everyone here to look towards Najaf, to look towards Medina to see that Prophet's grave, to go to Karbala, to go and say, Labbaika ya Hussein!
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 هيهات منا الذلة!
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 I thank everyone for coming out here. Inshallah, I didn't bore you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for your efforts. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.